Thank you so much. It's really a delight to be with everyone today. And with this help of this expert panel, we're going to explore food systems not just from a development or humanitarian concern, but through two perspectives. Food systems as a vulnerable component of national infrastructure and competition that can fuel insecurity and conflict. Our ability to nourish people. Our ability to nourish people is at the heart of security, stability, and peace. International humanitarian law prohibits targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure, and what could be more fundamental to civilian infrastructure than the ability to feed people adequately? Yet food systems, agriculture, processing, transport, distribution are increasingly targets in conflicts. They're also exposed in so-called hybrid settings, where cyber attacks or disruptions to supply chains can be used as asymmetrical tools of war. The second perspective is as old as humanity. Malnutrition, whether undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, or obesity, undermines human and societal potential. Malnourished populations suffer low productivity, greater health costs, and deeper cycles of poverty. In fragile and conflict-affected settings, this can fuel tensions and increase the risk of instability. Indigenous people know these realities firsthand, often on the front line of climate shocks and conflict over resources. They experience insecurity acutely. Yet their knowledge, rooted in centuries of lived experience, is one of the most powerful tools we have to build resilience. So protecting and learning from these traditions is not only a matter of equity, it's a matter of security. So what can we do? Without urgent action, extreme poverty could engulf up to 60% of people in fragile states by 2030. The good news is that the solutions are within reach. Well-nourished populations are healthier, more productive, and better able to withstand crisis. Ensuring access to diverse, nutrient-rich foods through sustainable agriculture and equitable value chains lays the groundwork for resilient and stable communities. To achieve this, nutrition must bridge humanitarian, development, and peace efforts. This requires innovative financing, long-term planning, and locally grounded action, from embedding nutrition in climate strategies to empowering local communities to strengthening supply chains and engaging the private sector responsibly and inclusively as critical. The Scaling Up Nutrition movement, which I lead, amplifies and exemplifies this approach. Acting as a neutral broker, SUN aligns multi-stakeholder partners, supports system strengthening, and mobilizes financing. Our discussion today will explore the connections from safeguarding supply chains to building resilience in communities, to ensuring governance frameworks put nutrition at the heart of security strategies. And with that, I'm really honored to turn to each of our panelists to reflect on the actions we must prioritize. I'll start my first question with General Eirik Kristoffersen, Chief of Defense, Norway, who brings insight on the role of defense in safeguarding supply chains and preparing for shocks. So why should militaries care about food systems, and how does food insecurity threaten stability? What is the role of food in national preparedness plans? Eirik, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. So one of my first military experiences in Sweden was going through survival courses. Back in my younger days, in my early career, we trained on how to survive both in the summer and in the wintertime in Sweden. And what do you look at when you are really down to nothing? You're out there and you basically don't have anything. You look for water, you look for food, you look for energy. So it's the basis of everything. Security, food security, and energy security is sort of the basis for everything else we build in our societies. So for the military, we of course need to care about this. to build more resilient societies, and also to make our own military less dependent on long supply chains, as we have seen. So one of the things we are doing in Norway now is to see how we can make our own bases, our air stations, our army units, our naval units. How can we make them more self-sustained when it comes to both food and energy? And then we see that we need to learn from what we learned during the pandemics. All the large supply chains are very exposed to insecurity. So you need shorter supply chains. And then you can start connecting resilience locally with operational readiness, but also with the local communities to make more resilient local communities. And then you can start adding on all the effects you get out of this. It's both the linkages between climate change, food security, resilience, but also the readiness of our forces. So altogether, this makes very much sense for the military. And if we don't do anything, we will be more exposed in the future. And then we need to work also on how to make sure that we can go into programs with the delivery, with the food suppliers locally, instead of buying from larger companies that delivers from all around the world, and which makes us more exposed to insecurity. So it's basically lessons learned from the pandemic that we now see that we take into the new situation we are in the world today. We're all strengthening our militaries in Europe at least, which also means we need to look into food security, because as you said, food security is national security.
Thank you so much for that, Eirik. And I also like the way you emphasized engaging with local communities. And it gives a great segue, I think, also to the next panelist, Ken Paul, a Wolastoqey leader from Neqotkuk in the Tobique First Nation, New Brunswick, who's going to speak to how communities experience insecurity firsthand and the issues of local knowledge. So from an Indigenous and fisheries governance perspective, Ken, how can frontline communities build true food resilience in the face of climate change?
Okay, William Giskok, Nadapik, Nagaskijinuak, Nidaliwas, Zagligapu, and Muin, Naga Nujaya, Wolastoqey, Neqotkuk. So, yes, my name is Ken Paul. I'm from the community of Neqotkuk, located in Atlantic Canada. I always like to introduce myself in my language to invite the ancestors in as witness. The main area where I work in Canada is in fisheries policy with Indigenous peoples. Across the nation. It's a very large nation. There's coastal fisheries, there's inland fisheries. And I don't know if people here know anything about Indigenous history in Canada, but the colonial food systems that were imposed upon us were done as a secondary effort to keep us dependent on the nation states. There was also widespread elimination of buffalo, for example, in Western Canada, which was the main food source for Indigenous peoples there. And when you eliminate natural food systems and interrupt that ecological cycle, it really does harm to not only the people that are living in that area, but to the other food systems that rely upon that, such as the predators. What I'm finding nationally and internationally now is when you look at what's happening with the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UNFCCC, the UN Ocean Decade, there seems to be a renewed interest in Indigenous peoples, mainly on the Indigenous knowledge that Indigenous peoples could provide towards the science. I'm a little bit nervous about that kind of concept because knowledge is not a commodity. It actually comes from a knowledge system. There's a methodology behind it, a whole paradigm, and it's also very entangled within the value systems of the communities. So, for example, I met an older fisher, William Sanapass, years ago. He said that since he was a young kid, he was a Mi'kmaq person who was passed on, but he said since he was a young kid, he used to fish herring. And when he was in his 30s, I think it was in his 30s, the government of Canada had provided him with a fishing license to fish herring. And he said that, well, he'd go out and fish, and he figured, by the fishing license, he could continue to fish any day that he wanted, but he figured by around lunchtime one day that he caught enough. So we stopped because he wanted to make sure there was fish for the next day and for the next year. And what we recognize that in our fisheries policy world is the precautionary approach. But what we look at that in the communities is common sense. We recognize that we have a relationship with fish, we have a relationship with everything that we eat actually, because they all come from plant life, animal life, bird life, or fish life, and in some cases insects. And we recognize if there's something that's living and has a spirit, we have to honor that relationship with that spirit. And when we honor the relationship with somebody, that means that we're going to look out for the best interest of that. So in a small way, transforming the way that you look at food and where it comes from its origin, and how we treat the earth, and how we develop our own laws and our own policies locally, that will actually help the greater food systems globally. And I'm just hoping that people can understand that and get a better appreciation for that.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you for flagging so much the integrity of the conscious food system and what's needed to nature and nurture that. My next speaker is Virginia Villar Arribas, the Director for Private Sector Partnerships at the World Food Program, and she's going to be highlighting how partnerships, especially with the private sector, can strengthen resilience in times of crisis. So Virginia, if you could let me know how partnerships, especially with the private sector, what collaboration there's been, some of your practical experiences from your more than 21 years in working in different countries around the world. It would be great if you could share that.
Thank you so much, Afshan, and thank you for having me here, and thank you for having this session. You know, as I was relooking at the title, you know, food under fire, this is a moment when food has been more used as a weapon of war, when it hasn't been, you know, it's the most difficult to be a humanitarian working on food in the field, and when, you know, it, as the general said, there is a complete linkage between food security and matters of national security and global stability. Now, to your question, partnerships are essential and are vital for food security and for food systems. You know, governments, civil society, multilateral organizations, but there cannot be zero hunger without private sector. And in the realization of this also with the private sector, we are very proud, we are very grateful, and we are very committed to have very good, innovative partnerships with the private sector at the local level and also at the global level. It's very important to also support private sector at the local level. Private sector has become also a first and very large supporter for emergencies on food security, and also on resilience and on food systems. And allow me to give you a few examples precisely on this, on resilience, in different areas. One is on AI. How do we use AI, tech, and data to work on food systems? And an example is we work with Microsoft, but also we work with Google with the data that we have, with the technology and AI that we have, to forecast more climatic disasters, to forecast also crops and so on. And with that, we get the information. We can predict that the disaster is going to happen. So, for instance, a flood in Bangladesh, we managed to get the information before, and 4 days before the flood, we sent early warning messages to 2 million people. We actually sent cash to 500,000 people, and within the hours, people were gone. The flood happened, and when they came back, you know, no lives were spared, but also a lot less money was wasted because the emergency costed half of what it would have costed. That's one example on tech. We also have others with Capgemini, with Johns Hopkins University. We worked on a platform that allows us to put information in terms of affordability of diets, in terms of what is available in the country, and what is usually used in the country. And for instance, in Zambia, information that took us 12 years to gather. We put it all together, and in a few minutes we actually had information that the governments and people dealing with food security were able to use in order to do wiser decision making for healthy diets. We work in other areas, supply chain. For instance, Mondi supports us in being much more environmentally sensitive for packaging, wasting a lot less food. We also have here partners that help us on food security, food safety and quality. So Dexter was speaking earlier. Mars also helps us into dealing with aflatoxin. And then we have a fantastic alliance. We have several members here. We have Rockefeller, for instance, on the school feeding coalition. This is a fantastic platform, transformational platform, 150 members, out of which 110 governments. At the moment with the World Food Programme, and the governments are covering 130 million children, and using the platform of school meals as an engine for a virtuous cycle where we create ecosystems that linking the farmers to school meals, to producers. The School Meals Coalition is an incredible platform that unites and is an example of the power of collective action. And within that, there is also another example of public-private partnerships with Novo Nordisk Foundation, Grundfos, and the Danish government, who have put together a program together with us, supporting at the moment 364,000 children in East Africa. Perhaps to finish, two things. One is, apart from that, the power of also working with individuals. It's also important that private sector help us raising awareness among the mass public. And many influencers, chefs, Michael Kors, we also have partnerships to raise awareness of the importance of the fight against hunger, and that advocacy partnerships are also very, very important. And then the business network. You represent here the Scale Up Nutrition. The Sun Business Network is also a powerful tool to unite business locally, globally, to ensure that at all levels we also continue fighting hunger. And there are about, I think it's more than 1,000 companies part of that network, and the impact is over 250 million people. So just some of the examples of where there is a lot of success, and we can scale it up.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you for outlining the breadth and scope of the work that World Food Programme does with private sector engagement. I think it goes back to the opening session of this report, where we really saw the need for broad engagement if we're going to be able to transform food systems in a way that meets both the dietary needs and the planetary boundaries. And you mentioned Sun Business Network, and I want to thank you for that, because those 1,500 small and medium entrepreneurs, principally located in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Asia, I think are also going to be an important part of the stakeholders that we need to engage with to look at the transformation of food systems locally. And that then gives me the opportunity to turn to Her Excellency, Nosipho Jezile, Chairperson of the Commission on World Food Security, and the South African Ambassador to the Rome-based UN agencies. And I'd really like to ask you the question of how can the Council on Food Security, as an inclusive intergovernmental organization, ensure meaningful participation of all stakeholders in addressing food security and malnutrition in all its forms?
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. I appreciate this opportunity on behalf of the Committee on World Food Security. I would like to start by just confirming that governance is essential to integrated food security and stability. In a decade of family farming, and I think the earlier speakers have given me a thread to this, and during the start of the plenary we had from the report that about 3.7 billion people live below social foundations, while 6.9 billion people have diets that would breach planetary boundaries. Again, this just serves as a reminder that we need to work together, coordinate better, and collaborate even better. So if we are then taking that only 1% of the world population is currently in the safe and just space, where the people's rights and food needs, including indigenous foods or local food varieties that were spoken about earlier, could be met within planetary boundaries. Do we know enough about the value of the indigenous food knowledge systems? And I think that the representative from Canada was already beginning to give us insights that whilst we have evidence, there is more evidence that's required for us to validate the actions that we have to continue to embark upon. And evidently, we also have to consider that shared benefits of investing in food security, global stability and resilience will serve as the means for integrated food systems governance. If food systems governance then is to be credible, it has to be fundamentally anchored on data, good data governance, evidence-driven, coherent, and collaborative in nature. So we rely on the science network globally, locally, and even within regions that would enable also resting such to voices of various stakeholders. The CFS, therefore, offers a unique platform that provides the ability that enables us to facilitate such convergence from whether academic literature, I remember Shakuntala was talking about models, and those that are more scientific, but they are also models of indigenous people that we need to begin to understand. And therefore, we create the platform for that convergence of the various stakeholders. And in the CFS within the United Nations, such convergence is through a dialogue of the various diverse stakeholders, which are knowledge partners, the Rome-based agencies, including the World Food Programme, the FAO, IFAD, and other knowledge partners like CGIAR and academia, civil society, indigenous people, family farmers, and of course, smallholder farmers and fishers. It also includes the private sector and also uniquely the philanthropic organizations. That also then includes the Sun Network. So such a global platform enables the conversations that serve as a place where it is possible to level the playing field and deal with the issues of justice that were also adequately covered in this report. Advocacy, therefore, within the United Nations, or at least within the multilateral forums, that would ensure that we build the bridges that enable stability and food security. Therefore, I'd like to also mention that it is also significant that we can utilize potentially the platform of the CFS to create a society-wide vision where politics converge with development path aspects, in particular in terms of characterization and the interconnectedness that has already been adequately spelled out between issues of conflict and how conflict is a causative factor to food insecurity, but also other physical factors like climate variability and also other aspects of biodiversity or even ecosystem services that may be under threat. To reduce, therefore, hunger or end hunger and reduce inequality would also contribute us embracing the importance of those actions that are important to reduce malnutrition in order to advance adequate food security, all of which lie at the core of shaping the future of food systems. I'd like to then conclude, if you allow me, just by again demonstrating that the CFS provides global policies that are reached by consensus, but that this links us to national governments that are to strive to implement such global normative frameworks, which are rights-based frameworks. The right to food as the oldest framework that, at least now, I would say is 22 years old. And we have then developed a number of other significant frameworks which are anchored on that basis. And at the global level, we would then say there's sufficient global frameworks, whether from the climate change in UNFCCC and the ILO guidelines in terms of decent work were mentioned earlier on. The key is why are we not advancing the implementation, and what do we need to do better? And my conclusion is that we need to collaborate more and build on these partnerships that were mentioned adequately even earlier on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. So I think we've run out of time, but I did want to say I think we've really brought together the different aspects that are needed in terms of national security, what are the capacities of local communities with their vast ecosystems, how do we work with private sector and local actors on the ground, and how do we use intergovernmental systems to really transform and get the creativity we need for food systems, food security, healthy planet, healthy people, in a way that's interconnected and brings all of us together in a common way to work together across an alliance that helps us build the change we need to see. So thank you to all the panelists. I really appreciate it and look forward to continuing our work together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break.
Thank you.
Please enjoy a light snack before we resume the program.